How the Dollar Became a Weapon, Part 1. From trust to control, it began with a promise that money would simply be a tool, a way to trade, to measure, to build. Nothing more, nothing political, nothing dangerous. But like all great illusions in history, that promise didn't last. Because somewhere between the minting of coins and the printing of paper, the thing we called money stopped being neutral. It became power. And nowhere was that transformation clearer than in the story of the US dollar, the currency that conquered the world not by gold or guns, but by trust. Trust, however, is the easiest thing to weaponize. In 1944, deep in the mountains of New Hampshire, world leaders gathered in a quiet hotel called Bretton Woods. The Second World War was almost over, and Europe lay in ruins. Nations needed a new financial order, one currency to rebuild global trade, to anchor the shattered economies of the planet. America, untouched by destruction and holding most of the world's gold, made its move. Every major country agreed their currencies would be tied to the US dollar, and the dollar itself would be backed by gold. It was elegant, logical, and it made the US dollar the heartbeat of the global economy. But hidden inside that system was a subtle imbalance. The United States, as the only country allowed to issue the reserve currency, could print dollars, and the rest of the world had to earn them. In other words, everyone else had to work for what America could create. Through the 1950s and 60s, the system seemed perfect. Factories boomed, ships sailed, money flowed. The dollar was everywhere, from Tokyo to Paris to Cairo. It wasn't just currency, it was confidence itself. But then, a few leaders began to notice something strange. While their nations produced goods and exported value, the United States simply exported dollars, paper for products, ink for industry. One man, French President Charles de Gaulle, called it what it was, a silent form of exploitation. He accused America of exporting inflation to the rest of the world, and in 1965, France began demanding gold instead of paper. Soon, others followed. The illusion of infinite trust began to crack by the late 1960s. U.S. gold reserves were collapsing as foreign nations lined up to exchange dollars for real metal. Something had to give. On a quiet Sunday evening in August 1971, President Richard Nixon addressed the nation. With calm confidence, he announced that the United States would no longer exchange dollars for gold. It sounded like a small technical change, but it wasn't. That night, the dollar lost its anchor. For the first time in modern history, money was backed by nothing. Gold was gone. Only faith remained. And in that instant, the rules of global finance changed forever. The dollar was now free from gold, free to multiply without limit. But freedom has a price. Because when money is created without value, someone eventually pays the cost. In Part 2, you'll see how America turned that cost into the most powerful weapon on earth. Continue to Part 2, the weaponization of the dollar. How the dollar became a weapon. Part 2, power, control, and consequences without the limits of gold. The US could print as much money as it wished. But that freedom came with a problem. What if other nations stopped using the dollar altogether? The answer arrived in the form of oil. Black gold. In 1974, the US struck a secret deal with Saudi Arabia. Every barrel of oil sold worldwide would be priced in US dollars. In return, America would provide military protection and political support to the Saudi kingdom. And just like that, the petrodollar was born. Now, every country that needed oil, and that meant every country had to hold dollars to buy it. If you wanted to drive your trucks, fly your planes, or keep your lights on, you first had to bow to the dollar. The US had discovered something extraordinary, a way to create global demand out of thin air. For decades, the system thrived. The dollar became the bloodstream of world trade. Global markets rose and fell with its value. But then, something darker began to emerge. When the Cold War ended and the US stood alone as the world's superpower, the dollar was no longer just a currency. It became a tool of control. Instead of sending troops, Washington could now impose sanctions. Instead of firing missiles, it could freeze bank accounts. Access to the global dollar network, the SWIFT system, became the new battlefield. Iran learned it, Venezuela learned it, Russia learned it. A single stroke of financial policy could cripple entire nations. No need for bombs when you can starve economies. And so, quietly, the dollar became a weapon. Yet the weapon cuts both ways. The same system that gave America power over others began to hollow out its own foundation. Since 1971, the dollar has lost more than 85% of its purchasing power. A cup of coffee that once cost 25 cents now costs $5. The national debt, once a few billion, has exploded to over $34 trillion. Every crisis from 2008 to 2020 brought the same response: print more, create more debt, pretend stability, but the illusion is fading. When Libya's Muammar Gaddafi proposed a gold-backed African currency, the gold dinar, he was swiftly removed. When Iraq's Saddam Hussein tried selling oil in euros instead of dollars, his regime collapsed. Different stories, same lesson. The dollar's dominance isn't maintained by chance, it's enforced by power. And every empire that depends on control eventually turns that control inward. Inside the United States, the damage is clear. Wages stagnate, prices climb, savings vanish. The middle class, once the symbol of American prosperity, now lives in quiet debt. Money, once a measure of freedom, has become a chain, because when every dollar is born from debt, freedom itself becomes borrowed time. But as the dollar reached its zenith, the world began to shift. Nations started asking why a currency from one country should dictate the fate of all others. China built its own financial networks. Russia began trading in rubles and yuan. The BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, began planning gold-backed settlements and digital alternatives. 2 decades ago, nearly 90% of global reserves were held in dollars. Today, that number is falling fast. For the first time in 80 years, the global financial map is redrawing itself. The weapon, it seems, has inspired others to build shields. History, however, has a pattern. Rome once debased its silver coins until they were worthless. Weimar Germany printed marks until people burned them for warmth. Every empire believes it can control the illusion forever, until reality catches up. The dollar's strength came from trust, and trust, once broken, never truly returns. So where does that leave us now? In a world spinning on digital dollars, backed by nothing but confidence and habit, a system where invisible code replaces gold, and debt replaces value? The illusion still holds for now. But what happens when it breaks? What happens when the weapon turns inward? If there's one truth to remember, it's this: money is never just money. It's power, control, and belief, all wrapped in paper. The US dollar became the world's greatest weapon not through conspiracy, but through evolution. Step by step, deal by deal, crisis by crisis, until one day, it was too powerful to question. But every weapon has a lifespan, and when this one reaches its end, the next war won't be fought with soldiers or sanctions, it will be fought with trust. The nations that prepare for that future will shape the next century. The rest will cling to the illusion until it collapses beneath them. So as you hold that dollar in your hand, remember, it isn't just paper. It's a story of creation, of control, of power. And the final chapter has yet to be written. End line for narration. If this story made you rethink what money really is, subscribe, because the next chapter of financial history is already being written, and most people won't see it coming.